Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander slowly into the sun-bleached myth of Sisyphus, the ancient king who rolls a boulder uphill for eternity, and more importantly, what he thinks about while doing it. You probably won't survive this kind of routine. Eternal cardio, no rest days, and zero workplace benefits. But it turns out, even doomed figures have time to think. A lot of time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up again? The hill is there, like always, tall and dusted with a shade of amber that suggests early morning, even though there's no sun to mark time here. The rock, your constant, your companion, your personal gym equipment, is squatting next to you like an old friend you never liked. You stretch, not out of necessity, but from muscle memory. You crack your knuckles. You sigh. And then, like you always do, you position yourself behind the rock and begin the climb. The gravel shifts under your feet, smooth like pebbled bread crusts, and you remind yourself to dig in the heels. Not that you'll make it far before slipping. But this is what you do. Push the boulder. Uphill. Forever. Your calves groan in protest. Your back makes a sound that might concern a modern chiropractor. You picture them now, those toga-wearing professionals of ancient Greece, with their wooden benches, and an unsettling enthusiasm for olive oil as medicine. You've heard worse advice. The sky above is painted in that eternal late afternoon gold, frozen in a state of almost sunset. You once tried to count clouds. They don't change either. The same 3 fluff clusters float across the same axis every day, or whatever passes for days in a punishment outside of time. As you trudge upward, you remember your first climb. The confusion. The brief, ridiculous hope that it was just a one-time task. A test. Maybe a metaphor. But metaphors don't make your knees ache. You still don't know where the gods are watching from. Probably somewhere just off stage, sipping nectar with one eyebrow raised. Or maybe they've long since forgotten you. Immortality can make even curses feel like clutter. Historians still argue whether the myth of Sisyphus was meant as a moral warning or just an elaborate poetic joke. You prefer the latter. It makes your job funnier. You lean into the rock's familiar curve. It's warm from imaginary sun, or maybe just from your skin, which has memorized every dent and divot. You've never named it. Too intimate, like naming your own bad idea. Your mind wanders, as it often does, because that's really your only escape. You think about your sandals. You wore better ones in life. Leather, dyed purple, stitched by a man who claimed to have once sewn for Apollo himself. These are simple, worn smooth. You joke to yourself that they're the original minimalist footwear, very in vogue among the dead. You wonder who else is here, in Tartarus, on their own looped journeys. There's Tantalus, of course, with his unreachable fruit and ironic thirst. You once tried to wave to him. He didn't wave back. Maybe he's just shy. Then there's Ixion, spinning eternally on his fiery wheel, the original failed in-law. He screams occasionally, but not in a scary way, more like someone yelling from a very distant amusement park ride. You've gotten used to it. The boulder shifts under your palms, a reminder to focus. You adjust your stance. Not that it'll help. You could do this blindfolded now, though you don't recommend it. The slope steepens. That's how it always happens. Gradually, then all at once. You breathe through your nose. Inhale for 3 steps. Exhale for 5. You once tried to invent an eternal fitness routine. Punishment Pilates. didn't catch on. You wonder if anyone tells your story anymore. Are there children listening around fires? Scrolls being copied? TikToks with dramatic filters and hashtags like Tantra Greek tragedy? You chuckle. You've always been more niche than viral. A breeze picks up. Pointless, since it never moves the rock. But pleasant. It smells like fig trees and something that reminds you of wet clay. Corinthian air, maybe? Or just your brain making things up again. You think about the first time you really noticed the rock's texture. It has veins, like marble. Not symmetrical, but intricate, like some lazy artisan tried to carve it into something but gave up halfway through. There's a dent shaped vaguely, like a fish. You've decided that's your favorite spot to push from. It fits your hand. A little ergonomic touch in the middle of punishment. And just like that, the top comes into view. Not near, but visible. You pause. That's new. Or maybe not. Maybe you've paused here every time. Who knows? There's no clock, no calendar, just the rhythm of push and fall and walk and repeat. But this moment, this halfway breath, it always tastes a little like hope. You know how it ends. But you keep climbing. That's the thing no one gets when they tell your story. It's not about the failure. It's about the climb. And even if you'd trade all of it for a quiet vineyard and an underwhelming bronze statue in your honor, for now, you keep pushing. You start your climb, legs aching already, reflecting on how this all started. The gravel doesn't forgive. Every step sinks a little. Not enough to slow you, just enough to annoy. Your ankles roll slightly inward. You've stopped noticing unless they give a proper snap. That only happens once every few centuries. The boulder is obedient for now. It leans against your shoulder with a weight that's somehow both immense and familiar, like the world's worst dance partner. You've learned to lean into it at a slight angle. Too straight, and you slip. Too angled, and you roll yourself. Yes, that happened once, possibly twice. You remember the trial. It wasn't a trial, really. Not in the legal sense. More like a very stern meeting with powerful beings who didn't like being outwitted. You picture Zeus, sitting on his cloud-crafted throne, wearing the expression of someone who just lost a bet. You cheated death, he'd said. You had, in fact, done that. Twice. Once by chaining up Thanatos, god of death himself, and stuffing him in a closet. The other time, well, you tricked Persephone into letting you return to the world of the living. You gave a whole speech about improper burial rites and marital devotion. She bought it. You think about that speech now, how impassioned you were, how fake the whole thing was. Historians still argue whether you were a devoted family man or just an expert con artist with a philosophical streak. You're not sure anymore. Memory blurs like wet ink. At the time, it seemed clever, and maybe it was. But cleverness has consequences, especially when it irritates immortal egos. You'd thought yourself safe. Back in Corinth, the city you built from scratch, or from a series of advantageous marriages and very flexible trade agreements. You had fountains, you had paved streets, you even had a public festival that didn't devolve into fistfights, which, for ancient Greece, was practically a miracle. You were a king, and not a particularly bad one. You gave speeches. You commissioned temples. You taxed reasonably, which by ancient standards meant you only stole slightly more than your neighbors. You think about those temples now. One had columns that didn't match. Someone ordered Doric, someone else delivered Ionic. You let it stand. Called it architectural fusion. The rock shifts. You grunt. Your shoulder presses in deeper. A beetle crawls by on the path beside you. Small, determined. You feel a strange kinship. You remember, with mild embarrassment, that for a short time, you declared yourself a living god. Not uncommon among rulers, really. You even wore a little gold circlet with a sunburst. It pinched. The gods, as it turns out, have a different opinion on mortals pretending to be divine. especially when said mortals keep escaping the underworld like it's a badly guarded hotel lobby. So they handed you this, an endless slope, a single task. Push the boulder, get it to the top, watch it roll down again. Walk, repeat. At first, you screamed, you raged. You tried pushing faster, tried bargaining, tried waiting the rock out. You once tried hiding behind a bush. That didn't work. Eventually, your tantrums faded into routines. Your routines into habits. Your habits into rhythms. Now you barely even think about the futility. You think about the friction in your knees, the heat of the stone, the smell of old moss and dust. You do think about Corinth, though. Sometimes you picture the agora, bustling with market sellers yelling over one another about the price of goat cheese. You remember a man who sold fish from a cart with one wobbly wheel. His name was Hectarios. You bought anchovies from him once. They were terrible. You pretended to enjoy them out of royal politeness. Now you would kill for a terrible anchovy. You also remember the statue they made of you. Bronze, muscular, too muscular, if you're honest. The sculptor got carried away. You had thighs like a warrior god. People used to rub your toes for luck. You sigh. The wind brushes against your cheek, warm and meaningless. You keep pushing. The rock is steady for now. You can almost forget it's going to betray you again. Almost. There was a brief century when you thought about stopping. Just refusing. Lying down. Letting the boulder rest beside you. Seeing if the gods would even notice. They noticed. They sent a very small lightning bolt. Not fatal, just itchy. Like a divine mosquito bite. Message received. You learned then. Even your silence is part of the punishment. So you climb. You hum sometimes. Mostly old festival songs. Once you tried composing a lullaby for your boulder. It was mostly humming and a single chorus line. Stay, stay, just this once. Didn't work. You hear voices sometimes, drifting through the rocks. Not real voices. Probably. Fragments. Like a dream you've almost forgotten. One said your name once. Whispers of storytellers. Maybe a philosopher mumbling through a lecture. Maybe a student half asleep, scrawling notes. Maybe some bored kid watching a YouTube video late at night. You like that thought. You've become a bedtime story. You ponder whether cheating death twice really warranted this punishment. And if Thanatos ever got a new job. Your grip slips just slightly on the boulder as that thought returns, like it always does. Not just the mechanics of what you did, but the sheer audacity of it. And the comedy. You really did shove the god of death into a bronze jar, tied it shut, and stashed him in a cupboard like a troublesome pet. You were the first and possibly last to do that. You didn't even do it with malice. You just didn't feel like dying that day. Of course, that caused a backlog. No one on Earth could die until someone let Thanatos out. Soldiers refused to fall in battle. Old merchants groaned for weeks, annoyed they couldn't pass on. Even the cows lived longer than they should have. People started whispering your name like a spell, or a curse. Eventually, Ares, always the drama king, barged down to the mortal realm and set Thanatos free. You can still picture the look on Death's face. Not wrathful, just tired, resigned. The look of a bureaucrat who came back from vacation to a desk full of paperwork. You never even apologized, probably should have. Then came your second offense, the underworld caper. You made it to Hades, officially dead that time. But instead of accepting your fate, you whined. Claimed your wife hadn't buried you properly, asked to return and reprimand her. It was a solid performance. Tearful even. Persephone bought it. She was still new to the job back then. You made it back to the world of the living, and then, well, you didn't return. You had a feast instead. Roast lamb, olives, a few drunken toasts to your own cleverness. You wore your best purple hymation and declared yourself immortal. Turns out, immortality is different when it's given by the gods, not stolen. You feel the boulder start to tilt slightly, its weight pressing harder into your shoulder. You shift, adjust your footing. Not that it matters. It always ends the same way. But reflexes die harder than kings. You wonder sometimes what happened to Thanatos. Did he get a reassignment? Did the gods upgrade to a more secure method of death delivery? Hermes, maybe, doing double duty? Or perhaps Thanatos still stalks the mortal realm, a little grumpier than before. Maybe he wears a small name tag now. Please do not imprison. You chuckle at the thought. It comes out as a wheeze. You haven't laughed properly in ages. Your chest remembers how, though it's more like a hiccup now. A bird circles overhead. No, not a bird. A shadow shaped like one. It never comes closer. Just loops endlessly. Another soul with a routine, perhaps? You nod to it, solemnly. You're both stuck in loops after all. The gods, you've come to believe, love irony more than justice. You challenged death, so now you live endlessly with a task no one finishes. You wanted immortality. You got it. Minus the perks. And yet, you still have thoughts, memory, language. You remember a festival once, in Corinth. Not one of the big ones. No parades, no sacrifices. Just a spring day, a dusty field, and children throwing pebbles into jars. The sound they made, plink, 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 echoed off the clay walls like laughter. You try to recreate that sound sometimes when the boulder shifts over smaller stones. It's never quite the same. Historians still argue whether you were punished for defying death or for exposing the gods' limitations. Your personal theory is they just didn't like being upstaged. Divine egos are notoriously fragile, especially when they wear crowns made of lightning. You once said humans should live with their eyes open, not blind in obedience. That quote might be misattributed now, or misunderstood. It's been centuries, after all, but the climb remains. You glance to the side. A strip of moss winds its way along a crack in the hill. Green, still alive. It wasn't there for the first few millennia. You take comfort in its stubbornness. You consider what a conversation with Thanatos would be like now. Would he still be angry? Would he understand? Imagine, you'd say, you had a chance to pause everything, to take one more breath, wouldn't you? Maybe he'd nod. Maybe he'd sigh and offer you a job. Assistant soul collector or rock maintenance supervisor. The boulder growls against the earth, a low grinding sound that rattles your knees. You used to think you could wear it down, chip it away with your hands. Once, you spent 32 cycles trying to erode the bottom with friction. Your palms bled. The gods sent a pigeon to laugh at you. It dropped something unspeakable on your head. Lesson learned. Still you push, because there's nothing else. Well, not nothing. There are thoughts, and those have become their own kind of resistance. You remember hearing someone say the mind is the last free place. You like that. You've painted entire cities in your imagination, designed new palace layouts, some with water features that flow uphill, others with hidden libraries behind wine cellars. You've written poetry in your head. Some of it was actually decent. Not that anyone will hear it, unless the wind carries it. You've spoken to the breeze before, slipped stanzas between gasps. Maybe they reach someone. Maybe there's a child who dreams in ancient hexameter, and no one knows why. Your arms tremble now. The rock's nearing the ridge. You know the signs. The way it gets lighter. Not because the task is easier, but because you've stopped resisting the end. You can already feel the tilt forward, any second now. But before it rolls, you always wonder, if this were the time it stayed, what would you do next? You recall ruling Corinth, its aqueducts, the trade routes, and your very mediocre palace decor. The slope levels just enough for you to find a brief rhythm. Your feet drag less. The rock presses into your shoulder with the usual sulkiness. but you've learned how to carry its weight like an old memory. You think about the city you once ruled, Corinth, that lovely mess of marble and mud brick nestled between two seas, a place with just enough wealth to feel important and just enough insecurity to show off about it. When you were king, trade boomed. Ships from Egypt and Phoenicia crowded the port, sails puffing like overstuffed tunics. Merchants hawked spices, perfumes, and odd trinkets with questionable provenance. You once bought a genuine Atlantean comb. It broke in half. You still wore it in your hair for a week. The aqueduct was your pride. Not your idea originally. Your engineers insisted they copied a design from somewhere in the East. But you approved it, you paid for it, and you named it the Sisyphus line. Modest, right? It worked mostly, until it rained too much. Then it worked as a rather efficient fountain in everyone's cellar. You walk past a familiar bend in the path where the rock always wobbles. You brace for it, knees soft. The wobble comes. You adjust. You've got this choreography memorized. Your palace, though, that's where things get less majestic. Historians like to picture gleaming white columns, expansive courtyards, mosaics with sea monsters and heroic battles. Yours had one small fountain that never worked, 2 chipped statues of nymphs, and a throne made from recycled ship wood. You called it rustic. Everyone else just called it splintery. You remember the dining room? Small, smelled like boiled leeks. The ceiling leaked every spring. Your advisors politely ignored the drip by talking louder. Still, it was yours. The view from the balcony showed the mountains in one direction and the sea in the other, like 2 gods forever glaring at each other from opposite corners of the world. You used to stand there with your hands clasped behind your back, pretending to ponder grand things. Usually, you were wondering what was for lunch. The rock hits a rut. You nudge it free with a well-placed knee. It rolls back onto the path. Sisyphus 1. Rut 0. You remember your treasury. Not particularly full, but meticulously organized. You insisted on labeled jars, sorted by coin type. You invented a short-lived system where coins were weighed and stamped with little dolphins. People were confused. You were delighted. You tried to build a second palace once. Bigger, better plumbing. It never got finished. The workers unionized. Yes, you were one of the first rulers to encounter that little problem. You tried to settle it by hosting a feast. It went terribly. Bread caught fire. You pass a small outcropping of stone that looks eerily like a Corinthian column. You tap it as you go by. Superstition. You've done it every cycle. It does nothing, but it feels like habit or hope. There was also the issue of your throne room's smell. Something about the limestone mixed with the torches gave the place a faint scent of goat. You lit incense. It smelled like perfumed goat. You eventually leaned into it. The musky ambiance of power, you called it. Trade, though, that was your triumph. You made deals with pirates, not officially, of course. They were independent maritime opportunists. You bartered for Egyptian linen, Persian glass, even a mysterious powder that turned everything it touched blue. You tried dyeing a toga with it once. It stained your skin for weeks. Your advisors refused to look you in the eye. You created tariffs, but kept them reasonable, enough to fund the city watch and the occasional festival. You once wrote a speech praising the economic benefits of sponge tax incentives. It went over surprisingly well. Historians still argue whether Corinth flourished because of your rule or in spite of it. You suspect it was both. You made a lot of mistakes, but you also knew when to delegate. Like the time you let your cousin handle irrigation planning. He promptly flooded 3 neighborhoods. You took over again after that. The rock gets heavier, not literally, but in the way your memories settle. You remember the courtyard fig tree. It bore fruit exactly once every 4 years. You wrote a poem about it. No one liked it. You read it anyway. Twice. The temple to Poseidon on the coast. White stone, too many stairs. You funded it with spare war chests left over from a battle that never actually happened. You told the people it was a preventative victory. They clapped. You bowed. You once hosted a symposium where someone brought a tortoise in a basket. No one knows why. The tortoise had its own cup of wine. You still think about that sometimes. The climb is steeper now. You grit your teeth. The boulder groans in solidarity. You remember the mural you had painted in the agora. It showed you standing heroically between two ships, holding a scroll and a spear, neither of which you ever used in real life. The artist made your beard too pointy. You never corrected him. You used to sit in council meetings doodling in the margins of papyrus. Little boats, little rocks. Once, a diagram for a chair that wouldn't squeak. That was your greatest unrealized invention. All of it, your city, your plans, your small absurdities, stayed behind. Now you climb. But in your mind, the streets of Corinth are still noisy, still sunlit, still slightly damp from the ever-dripping aqueduct. You see the faces, some of them smiling, some suspicious, all of them real, and you wonder if they remember you too. You pause to chew fig leaves and remember the first time you tried to invent a lunch break. The boulder doesn't like stopping. You can feel it pressing against your back like a fussy child needing constant attention. But your feet have begun to ache in that deep, stubborn way that makes you crave anything other than upward movement. So you call a break, not because the rock demands it, because you do. You ease it gently against a crooked wedge of stone jutting from the hill, a natural cradle you discovered cycles ago. It won't hold forever, but it'll do for a few minutes. The rock creaks softly in protest. You pat it like a mule. Stay, you whisper. You sit on a nearby patch of flattened grass. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because sitting is an act of rebellion in an eternity of motion. You reach for the satchel that doesn't exist, but always feels like it should be there. In your mind, it's made of goat hide and smells faintly of thyme. Inside, a handful of dried figs, some olives, and a wedge of barley bread that could double as masonry. The kind of lunch that demands more chewing than thinking. You snap off a fig leaf from a nearby shrub. In real life, they'd be bitter, waxy. But in memory, they're crisp, sweet, with phantom nectar. You chew lazily. You invented lunch breaks back in Corinth, or tried to. The first time, you called it a ritual pause of contemplation. You even had a gong. The palace staff were confused, then grateful, then confused again when you demanded everyone return in exactly 22.5 minutes. No one honored the time limit. They lingered, chatted. Someone tried napping in the Basil courtyard. You caught him and promoted him to chief nap advisor as a joke. It stuck. Lunch was a sacred thing to you. Not just for the food, which was passable, but for the pause. The stillness in a noisy city. A moment where time felt soft. You'd sit under a portico, watching the sun slice across white stone. Chickens pecked in the distance. Someone would be playing a flute badly. You'd pretend to read a scroll. Mostly, you just let yourself be. Here, on the hill, lunch is more imaginary. But you still try. You still pause. You still chew air like it holds secrets. You glance up the hill. The boulder sulks where you left it. For now, it reminds you of that time you tried to convince your council to shorten work hours during the harvest season. You called it a humanitarian calendar adjustment. They called it lazy. You compromised by declaring an official festival every third day. People celebrated by ignoring your laws entirely. Historians still argue whether you were an innovator of labor reform or just a bored king with too many olives and not enough crises. You know the answer. It's yes. You scratch your shin. The dust here never leaves. It clings, like guilt or poorly chosen metaphors. You tried washing once, found a stream halfway down the hill, cold, clear, a gift. You splashed it over your face like a man reborn. The next cycle, it was gone. The gods giveth, then promptly taketh away. The sun overhead doesn't move. But your body still tells time. The ache behind your eyes, the tightness in your back, that persistent desire to stretch your legs and lie flat in a field of indifferent grass. You think of picnics. There was one in particular. Late spring, warm wind, someone brought honey cakes. You don't remember her name. She laughed with her whole chest, like a god without consequences. You spilled wine on your tunic and tried to blame a passing bird. She didn't believe you, but she laughed anyway. You wonder where she is now, or if she was ever real. You pull your knees to your chest and gaze upward. The path ahead zigzags, steep and smug. You know every twist, every loose stone. You've tried shortcutting once. The gods responded by growing the hill sideways. You went backwards for 6 hours. Lesson learned. The fig leaf is gone, swallowed or forgotten. You dust off your palms and look at them. Scarred, calloused, oddly philosophical. These are not the hands of a king. These are the hands of a man who has touched one rock too many. You imagine yourself hosting a feast again. Not in a palace, on this hill. A rock-themed gathering. Invitations carved into stone tablets. Menu items like crushed lentils and boulder-baked flatbread. Everyone gets a pebble as a party favor. Terrible idea, but oddly satisfying. You'd seat Thanatos at the far end of the table, just to keep things light. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep. You don't get that luxury anymore, but to listen. The wind, the silence, a sound like stone settling into stone. Your belly doesn't growl. Not exactly. It just remembers. You remember the rhythm of eating, of feeling full, of licking honey off your thumb. Small joys, like crumbs beneath the banquet of memory. And now the boulder, ever the diva, shifts slightly in its cradle. Breaks over. You rise slowly. Stretch. Crack your spine in 3 satisfying pops. One for your pride, one for your past, and one for whatever comes next. You approach the rock and place your hands on its warm, worn face. "Let's go," you whisper. "Lunch is over." As you pass a certain tree, you overhear a squirrel talking trash about Zeus and muse on godly office drama. It's not a tree in the normal sense, more of a persistent illusion. Crooked, stunted, its bark the color of old sandals, and its leaves always frozen mid-rustle. It sits halfway up the slope, wedged into the hillside like someone accidentally dropped it there eons ago, and every time you pass it, something strange happens. Today, it's the squirrel again. He's small, lean, a jittery blur of dusty brown with a tail that twitches like it has opinions. You've named him Archibald. He never approved the name, but he's never denied it either. That counts. As you approach, the rock digging into your palms, you hear him chittering. Not the usual squirrel nonsense, no acorn inventory or branch gossip, but full-on deity critique. And then he says, "Let there be thunder," like he invented it. I've been shocking myself on tree sap since before his beard grew in. You blink, not surprised, just resigned. You've learned that anything can talk if you're eternally tired enough, and you've been very tired for a very long time. Archibald continues, twitching his tail in outrage. "Zeus this, Zeus that. You'd think he was the only Olympian with a weather trick. Hades at least minds his own business, except for the whole underworld thing. Bit of a recluse, that one." You grunt. The boulder is being especially uncooperative today. Maybe it doesn't like eavesdropping. You push past the tree, giving Archibald a nod. He throws a half-eaten fig at your rock, It bounces off with a wet splat. This is fine. This is normal now. Godly drama is an old song. You knew it well even before your punishment. Olympus may have been a mountaintop, but it functioned more like a very dysfunctional royal court. Endless intrigue, petty spats, grudges wrapped in togas. You once attended a divine banquet. Sort of. You weren't really invited, but you snuck in under the guise of delivering a speech on mortal virtue. No one questioned you. Zeus had already downed 3 amphoras of wine and was loudly debating with Athena about the aerodynamic properties of owl feathers. You spent most of that night near the fig platter, pretending to be philosophical. Dionysus danced on a table. Artemis threw a plate. Ares challenged someone's chariot to a duel. You quietly took notes. The gods, as mighty as they are, never learned subtlety. Everything is opera. Everything is exaggerated. If someone sneezes, it's a fate-bound prophecy. If someone stubs their toe, it's a curse. Historians still argue whether the pantheon was a moral compass or just divine performance art. You're leaning toward the latter. Strongly. You grunt again as the boulder snags on a patch of pebbles. You dig in your heels, the slope dragging you back just slightly. A breeze stirs the tree above. The same breeze, always. As if some minor wind god set it on loop and forgot to turn it off. You once tried to report your punishment as an administrative error. You filed a complaint, carved it into stone, tied it to a bird's leg, and sent it skyward. It returned 6 cycles later with "denied" chiseled into the back. The bird looked apologetic. You think about Hermes sometimes. Messenger, trickster, sandal enthusiast. You imagine he's the office gossip of Olympus, fluttering between thrones, whispering updates like, "Did you hear what Aphrodite said about Hera's temple robes?" Then vanishing in a wink of wings and sass. The boulder groans again. You whisper something unkind to it. It doesn't respond. Or maybe it does. Maybe the boulder is just the gods in disguise, petty, dense, and always in the way. You remember once hearing that Hephaestus considered forging an automated punishment device, something with wheels. Sisyphus free rolling, he called it. But Zeus vetoed it on account of not enough suffering. Typical. You pass a ridge and the tree disappears from view. You half expect Archibald to chuck another fig at your head as a farewell. He doesn't. Maybe he's saving it. You imagine what it's like on Olympus now. New gods, maybe. Updated titles. Dionysus, head of recreational chaos. Athena, director of strategic wisdom. You see Zeus pacing around the clouds, muttering, "Mortals these days, always praying for parking spots. Maybe they still talk about you. The one who cheated death. The one who wouldn't stay put. The one who thought he could outsmart immortality with quick words and clever hands. You're flattered in a way, but mostly you're tired. You adjust your grip on the rock. Your hands slide into the grooves that centuries have carved, tiny ridges worn down by repetition and regret. You pass a familiar crack in the ground, one that looks like a smile. You smile back. Why not? Madness is just routine with flair. At the next bend, there's a pile of feathers. White, soft, slightly scorched. Hermes must have crash-landed again. You leave them be. The gods never clean up after themselves. You wonder what Archibald will say tomorrow. Maybe a rant about Apollo's harp solos. Maybe a critique of Athena's helmet collection. Whatever it is, you'll be here to hear it. Because the hill is long, the gods are petty, and the rock never sleeps. You meet an old philosopher halfway up the hill, arguing with a snail, and reflect on logic, legacy, and whether snails have morals. The hill is particularly dry today. The kind of dry that makes your throat feel like it's been lined with parchment. Each footstep kicks up a whisper of dust. Your sandals are dust-colored now. They might have started as leather, but that was a few eternities ago. Now they're more theory than footwear. As the rock lumbers ahead of you, you notice the shape again. A hunched figure near a bend in the path. At first you think it's a trick of the light or a particularly dramatic boulder formation. But no, it's the philosopher. Back again. He's always here around this curve, sitting on a flat stone that may or may not be his preferred debating chair. Thin, long-bearded, nose like a chipped arrowhead. He wears a robe that seems made of fog and moss, and he holds a stick he doesn't need for walking, only for pointing. Today he's pointing it at a snail. "You say you have no ethics," he scolds, "and yet you refuse to trample that leaf. That, my slow-footed friend, is intent." The snail, for its part, seems unconcerned. It inches forward with complete moral neutrality. You grunt. The boulder's misbehaving again, dragging at your side like a reluctant pet. The philosopher glances up. "Sisyphus," he intones solemnly. "Pusher of burdens, thinker of eternal thoughts. What say you? Does this snail have a soul?" You take a moment. Adjust your grip. Wipe your brow with a forearm that feels more stone than skin. Then you answer, voice gravelly from disuse. "If it does, it's better at peace than I am." The philosopher chuckles, tapping his chin. Interesting. But flawed. Peace may simply be ignorance of the struggle. And surely you, of all souls, know that struggle is its own kind of knowledge. You wonder, not for the first time, if he's real. A projection? A hallucination? A punishment enhancement algorithm installed by the gods? Regardless, he seems content with his little slice of the path. You used to read the Stoics, scrolls from Epictetus, long-winded discourses from Chrysippus, who could turn a grocery list into a philosophical treatise. They all had theories about pain, control, and accepting fate. You never really bought it. You always thought it was more interesting to ask what could be done, not what could be endured. The boulder inches forward, and you stumble slightly. The philosopher doesn't flinch. "I once debated a shade who believed suffering was simply resistance to the natural order," he says. You grunt again. "He now cleans Tartarus's chamber pots," he adds. You glance at the snail. It's still creeping toward the leaf it refuses to destroy. You wonder if that's what you look like to the gods. Small, determined, comically slow. You adjust your stance. The stone is warming in your hands. Always does by this part of the path. "I met a cynic once," the philosopher continues, not looking at you. "Told me your whole punishment was metaphor, a divine fable. You're not real," he said, "just a cautionary tale." "And yet," you mutter, "here I am." He nods, satisfied. And here he isn't. Historians still argue whether Sisyphus was a symbol of noble rebellion or foolish defiance. Some say you represent the futility of human ambition. Others think you're a cosmic middle finger to tyranny. You've stopped caring. What matters is the climb. Not because it has purpose, but because it's yours. You imagine what the snail would say if it could talk. Maybe something profound. Or maybe it would just request a lettuce leaf and a nap. The philosopher peers at the boulder now, as if he hasn't seen it before. "What do you think it wants?" You pause, consider. "To be left alone," you say. "Ah," he sighs, "a shared desire." You pass him without ceremony. He'll be here next cycle, he always is, sometimes debating moss. Once, a cloud. As you resume your climb, you find yourself echoing his question. Does the boulder want anything? Can punishment develop sentience? If so, has it grown to enjoy your company? You shudder. Best not to dwell on that. The rock catches on a root. You yank it forward. It complains with a low groan that sounds eerily like the philosopher's laugh. You glance over your shoulder. He's now addressing the snail about predestination. The snail, undeterred, continues its leaf-adjacent journey. You admire its commitment. You once gave a speech in Corinth about moral progress, claimed the city could improve itself through logic, dialogue, and well-made aqueducts. It ended with a riot over fish prices. You tried. You wonder if the philosopher ever gives you credit, if he writes mental scrolls about your answers. Today, the Boulder King mused on non-agency. Promising. You snort. Your shoulder aches, your knees crackle. But the path is familiar. The snail's leaf is still whole, and the hill, predictably, keeps rising. You press on, mind full of talking squirrels, disputing philosophers, and one very patient snail. And somewhere deep in your chest, a tiny voice whispers, "Maybe tomorrow I'll win the argument." You pass the halfway rock pile again, where a chorus of pebbles hums old war songs, and remember that time you accidentally started a naval battle with a pun. There's a certain curve in the hill, where the ground dips slightly and the boulder always becomes briefly, mysteriously cooperative. It's like the stone is taking a breath with you, preparing for the push ahead. You use the opportunity to glance to your right, where a scattered heap of pebbles glints in the dull light like the world's laziest treasure hoard. You call it the halfway choir. The pebbles don't sing in the traditional sense. There are no lyrics, no discernible melody, just a hum, a low, comforting vibration, like someone humming an old tune through a wall. It changes slightly every time you pass, sometimes slower, sometimes minor key, sometimes suspiciously like a drinking song. You once leaned down to listen more closely, and were fairly sure one of the stones whispered, "Left flank." You didn't ask questions. Some mysteries are best left at a murmur. Today, the hum sounds vaguely martial, a slow, plodding chant. You recognize the rhythm. It matches the cadence of the old Corinthian war song, oars in time, shields in line. It was not a particularly catchy tune, but the city guard insisted on singing it loudly during drills. You used to hear it echo off the harbor walls. It makes you think of your brief, spectacularly disastrous involvement in naval strategy. You weren't supposed to be in charge of the fleet. That honor belonged to your cousin Polydoros, a man with too many teeth and not enough brain. He once tried to bribe a sea captain with a bag of onions. It failed. But you, ever the opportunist, delivered a speech at a portside festival and made an ill-advised pun. Something about rowing toward victory, but letting the enemy see their mistake. They didn't laugh. They did, however, interpret it as a call to arms. 3 ships launched that afternoon. None returned. 1 ran aground. 1 was captured by pirates who rebranded it as a floating tavern. The 3rd was sunk by a confused pod of dolphins who, according to a terrified sailor, were just really aggressive that day. Historians still debate whether that was your fault. You tend to accept partial blame, not for the battle but for the pun. The boulder hits a smoother patch now, coasting slightly. You almost feel like you're in control. You once tried to recruit dolphins for reconnaissance, wrote a plan, trained a local boy to whistle in patterns. You called it Project Sea Ear. It failed spectacularly when the dolphins demanded fish up front and swam off with your sandals instead. The halfway choir hums a few notes louder, like it disapproves of your tactics. Or maybe it's applauding. It's hard to tell with rocks. You think back to a festival you sponsored to celebrate naval morale and moderate success. The decorations were excellent. The wine was free. Someone set off fireworks early and nearly blinded the lyre player. You gave a speech there too. A better one. No puns. Just a steady reminder that the sea always gives and always takes. You raised your cup. People cheered. A pigeon pooped on your shoulder mid-toast. No one mentioned it, which somehow made it worse. You still dream about boats sometimes. Not majestic warships, just fishing vessels. Small, creaky. The kind with frayed nets and sunburned helmsmen. You picture yourself in one, floating aimlessly, the sea breathing beneath you like a slow heartbeat. No oars, no destination, just drift. You tried to build a scale model of a trireme once. As a hobby, the gods confiscated your tools after you accidentally launched it down the hill during a windstorm. It took out a row of decorative cacti. You miss the sea, the way it made your problems feel smaller, like the waves had their own arguments and didn't care about yours. The hill doesn't have that luxury. It notices everything. It keeps score. You glance down at the pebble pile again. The humming softens, slips into a slower rhythm. Maybe a lullaby. Maybe the rock's way of saying, keep going. You wonder if the pebbles are old fragments of your boulder, pieces that chipped off during one of its many rebellions. Maybe they hum because they remember too. You reach down and pick one up. It's warm, smooth. You hold it to your ear out of curiosity. It whispers, "Tacticians don't pun." You place it gently back in the pile. At the crest of the dip, the slope steepens again. The boulder tugs harder, as if insulted that you paused to commune with lesser stones. You sigh, crack your knuckles, dig your heels into the dust. As you push forward, the hum of the halfway choir fades behind you. But you still hear a faint refrain. Oars in time, shields in line. Try not to sink this time. And you smile, because even rocks have memories. And yours? Yours are ridiculous. You nearly fall into a crater that wasn't there yesterday, and contemplate whether the gods are actively messing with the landscaping just to keep things spicy. Your foot slips, just barely. A half step to the left and you might have tumbled right into it. A shallow crater, maybe 4 feet across, sunk into the hillside like someone took a divine ladle and scooped a bite out of the path. It wasn't there yesterday. You pause, one hand still braced on the boulder. The rock, in its usual moody way, resists halting, so you dig in harder and give it a warning grunt. It sulks. You stare into the crater. At first glance, it looks natural, jagged edges, some disturbed pebbles at the rim. But the symmetry is too clean. The soil inside is oddly smooth, as though it's been patted down by the world's most passive-aggressive god. You've learned to trust your suspicions. The hill changes, not often, but enough. Once, there was a stretch of path lined with glowing mushrooms. You liked them. Soft light. Soothing ambience. One day they were just gone. Replaced with sharp gravel and a wasp with an attitude problem. Another time, the entire hill tilted 5 degrees to the left. You walked sideways for months. So now, this crater. You step around it, giving it a wide berth. The boulder complains. You whisper soothing nonsense to it. It's just a detour, old friend. No need to throw a tantrum. You look back once. You're certain the hole is deeper now. Only slightly, but definitely. The gods, you decide, are messing with the terrain. Witch tracks, honestly, they've always been theatrical. When mortals displease them, they don't just punish, they embellish. You remember the story of Actaeon. Stumbled upon Artemis bathing and was turned into a stag. That's the part everyone knows. What they forget is the extra flourish. He was chased down by his own hunting dogs. The gods curate their consequences. And then there's you, the original death dodger, the escape artist who got too clever, twice. They didn't just kill you, they gave you an eternal workout routine. But here's the question you ask yourself, more and more. Do they still care? Maybe once, the hill was a stage. The gods gathered with popcorn to watch you push. Maybe they made bets. How many cycles until he snaps? Will he try to roll it sideways again? You did, by the way. Rolled it off the main path once in an act of quiet rebellion. It made it halfway down a ravine, then stopped. You took that as a sign. It took 6 cycles to drag it back. The gods didn't intervene, which made it worse. But lately, you're not so sure anyone's watching. You suspect divine boredom, that you've been left running on autopilot. Maybe your punishment is now managed by some undergod with a clipboard and a bad attitude. Sisyphus. Still pushing? Yep. Great. Let's throw a crater in there. Keeps the knees guessing. Historians still debate how personal divine justice really was in ancient myths. Were you a moral example, or just a celestial court jester? Some call you a warning. Others, a prototype for existential dread. You think you're just Outsourced maintenance. Still, you press on. The boulder creaks over a rise. Your muscles settle into their eternal groove. There's a kind of rhythm to it now. Left foot, right foot. Press, breathe, adjust, mutter a curse, repeat. You imagine the crater is part of a new performance review. Maybe there's a chart somewhere. Crater impact on struggle efficiency. Pulsed 3%. You'd laugh if your throat weren't dust. You once tried to file a landscaping complaint, carved it into a piece of shale and left it at the base of the hill with a little sign that read, "For Zeus." It disappeared the next day. In its place, a single grape. Wrinkled. You took that as sarcasm. Sometimes, you dream of changing the terrain yourself. Just a little. Rearranging a stone here. Flattening a patch there. You fantasize about building stairs, not for ease, but for variety. You'd carve your name into each step. Sisyphus was here. Still here. Always here. The crater behind you seems quieter now, but your spine prickles with the awareness that it's watching, or maybe being watched through. You mutter to yourself, if the gods are watching, they're getting lazy. At least toss in a wind chime, and yet you carry on, because this is what you do. The hill remains your co-worker, your captor, your one consistent relationship. You crest another rise and squint at the path ahead. For a moment you swear the crater's twin is waiting just up the slope. Same size, same scoop, mirrored like an afterthought. You sigh loudly. Really? The wind answers with a whisper you decide not to decipher. You feel the boulder shift slightly as you adjust your grip. The weight, familiar, almost comforting. As if, after all these cycles, it too is just playing its part. You wonder, if you stepped aside, let it roll into one of those craters, would it vanish? Would the gods panic and reinstall it? Would anyone even notice? You won't test it. Not today. The cycle is too well worn, and your feet know the rhythm too well. Still, as you push, you glance back once more. The crater is gone. No, not gone, just never there. The ground is smooth, undisturbed. The grass undents itself. The universe resets, and you chuckle. Because even in eternity, someone is still rewriting the script. A wind picks up and carries with it the smell of lentils, triggering a memory of a market brawl over soup recipes and your short-lived attempt at culinary lawmaking. The scent hits you just below the ridge, carried on a sudden gust that nearly takes your balance with it. The boulder sways, and you respond on instinct. Shoulder-braced, right foot planted in the gravel trench you've carved over centuries. The scent is unmistakable. Lentils, savory, earthy. A touch of cumin, maybe? Possibly rosemary. Definitely a little garlic. The kind of aroma that makes the stomach sigh, even when your stomach is more theoretical than functional these days. You haven't smelled lentils in 1,000 cycles at least. You'd convinced yourself your nose had forgotten how. But here it is. Sudden, rich, absurdly nostalgic. And with it, the memory crashes in. The great soup riot of Corinth. It started innocently enough. You were feeling unusually proactive one morning and decided that the people needed structure. Guidance, even, in their culinary habits. Not regulation, you told them. Just inspiration. You drafted what you generously called the 12 Flavor Edicts, a list of strongly worded soup preferences passed off as public policy. Edict 1. No lentils without bay leaf. Edict 2. If your stew can stand up on its own, it's not soup, it's cement. Edict 3. No more than 3 chickpeas per ladle scoop, unless supervised. You meant it as a joke. Mostly. The merchants, unfortunately, did not. Within days, soup vendors were forming alliances, turning street corners into competitive kitchens. One woman from the east side reportedly sold an herbed lentil bowl so good it caused a philosophical breakdown in a passing priest. That was the beginning of the end. 2 weeks later, The agora was chaos. Competing soup stalls flung ladles like javelins. Boiling stock sloshed over sandal straps. One man tried to pass off a grainy chickpea porridge as neo-stew. He was exiled for culinary crimes. Historians still argue whether you escalated the tension by staging a flavor tribunal in the town square. You may have worn ceremonial robes and referred to yourself as the Grand Brothmaster. You may also have used that opportunity to ban raisins from rice dishes, which inflamed further unrest. The wind picks up again, teasing more of the scent down the slope. Your eyes sting, not from emotion, but from memory-laced seasoning. The boulder shifts again, sulking. You whisper, yeah, we're going, and push. You remember the resolution of the soup crisis, a ceasefire signed under the central fig tree. You brokered it using a compromise dish, lentil stew, lightly spiced, served with flatbread and a knowing shrug. It wasn't delicious, but it was neutral. You still dream of that one dish the fisherman's wife made, caramelized onion and barley, with something green and sharp in the aftertaste. You never found out what it was. She refused to tell you, said it was a family secret passed down from a great aunt who once cooked for a minor god. Possibly Poseidon. Possibly not. You tried to replicate it once in your palace kitchens. The result exploded. You blamed the salt ratio. Your cook blamed hubris. The hill curves gently here, a reprieve before the incline sharpens. You take a moment to roll your shoulders. The rock groans like an old man rising from a bath. The smell of lentils lingers, faint now, carried upward and away. You watch it vanish on the wind like a mirage that stopped caring. There was a time you considered opening a food court in Corinth. You even designed the layout. 4 stalls around a central fountain, seating shaded by cloth canopies dyed in muted purples. The idea never made it past the napkin stage. One of your advisors accidentally used the parchment as a napkin. To this day, you suspect sabotage. You learned that food is power, not just sustenance. Control the flavor, control the crowd. You once quelled a tax riot by distributing honey cakes. You still believe that was your finest act of diplomacy. But then again, you also once tried to standardize stew measurements across districts. That ended with a barrel fight in the North Plaza and a goat getting appointed as unofficial soup mascot. You smile at the memory. The lentil scent has vanished completely now. Maybe it was never real. Maybe some god, bored and scrolling through your punishment settings, flipped a toggle marked Food Nostalgia Mild. Or maybe it's a gift. A reminder that even in endless struggle, something good can drift in unexpectedly. Uninvited. Unexplained. Like a bowl of soup after a cold morning, offered with no questions asked. You press on. The incline sharpens, as it always does after this point. The boulder pushes back, as it always will. But for a moment, your step feels lighter. The climb, less bitter. Because somewhere, in the imagined kitchens of your past, pots still bubble. Bread still rises. And someone, somewhere, is arguing over whether lentils need cumin. You hope they win? A sudden rain falls from a cloudless sky, soaking you in seconds, and you recall your brief career as Corinth's official rain interpreter and the time you misread a drizzle as a royal omen. The drop hits you on the nose like a question mark. You look up. Nothing. The sky remains its usual dull gray-beige, color of old parchment and divine apathy. No clouds, no wind shift, no warning, and yet it rains. Not a drizzle, not a polite mist. A full, determined downpour, like someone's up there with a tipped amphora and a grudge. Within seconds, your tunic clings to your back like a needy ghost. The boulder glistens, streams of water cascading down its surface, as if it too is being rebaptized. You mutter something under your breath. Not a curse, exactly. just a pointed sigh with syllables. This isn't the first time. You remember your brief, ridiculous tenure as Corinth's official rain interpreter. It started when the city experienced 13 days of consecutive, oddly scheduled rainfall. Always at 3:07 in the afternoon. Always lasting 7 minutes. Always following a goat's sneeze. Naturally, the people assumed divine intent. You, ever the opportunist, volunteered your services. You told them you could read the patterns, decode the moods of the sky, speak fluent drizzle. You bought a special hat. You stood in the agora with arms outstretched, letting rain soak your face while you pretended to receive transmissions from Olympus. Once, it rained sideways. You declared it a blessing on left-handed artisans. It boosted pottery sales for a week. Another time, it rained in the shape of concentric puddles. You called it a warning to hoard grain. It turned out to be a sewer overflow. But you looked wise anyway. Historians still argue whether rain interpreting was a form of early meteorology or a particularly theatrical grift. You maintain it was an art form. The wet path turns slick now, a betrayal beneath your feet. The boulder jerks, testing your balance. You dig in your heels, plant your hands, and growl. Not unlike a large, damp terrier. You once gave a speech comparing rainfall to divine punctuation. A comma, not a full stop, you said. An ellipsis of the heavens. You still think that was poetic. The high priest disagreed and threw a soggy hymn at you. You remember a festival you organized during your rain interpreter phase. The first splashing. People wore togas treated with beeswax. You convinced everyone to bring buckets to catch divine insights. Children used theirs to collect frogs. One man bottled his puddle and sold it as certified sacred condensation. He made a small fortune. Your favorite part was the music. You had flutists play underwater notes. Not practical. Mostly produced bubbles and confusion. Still, the effort was commendable. The rain continues. Despite no clouds, despite logic. You look again to the sky. You're not even trying to be subtle, you mutter. Just write me a note next time. You imagine a minor weather deity in a toga, chuckling behind a two-way mirror. He looks damp. Perfect. Cue thunder. But no thunder comes. Just more water. Your sandals squelch now with each step. The boulder is dangerously smooth. You reposition, trying to grip the lower curve with your shoulder blade. It slips. You groan. It reasserts its weight. Petulant, as always. There was one particularly embarrassing misinterpretation back in your Corinthian days. A light afternoon sprinkle during a royal procession. You declared it a symbol of divine unity. The heavens weep with joy, you proclaimed. Then the storm struck. Thunder cracked, lightning hit the wine cart, and the queen's favorite peacock was never seen again. You were demoted to advisory rain observer, a non-salaried position. Still, people consulted you in secret. You'd be at the baths, and someone would whisper, "It drizzled on my left shoulder while I was baking. Does that mean anything?" You always said yes. It made them feel special. You reach a small outcropping. Flat, wide, a natural shelf. You edge the boulder onto it, gently, giving yourself a breath. The rain softens. The sky remains blank. The puddles form geometric shapes that might mean something if you squint and suspend disbelief. You imagine carving a new tablet for the city. If it rains without clouds, go inside anyway. Simple wisdom, but no one would listen. You think about the warmth of a clay roof, the patter of rain hitting tile, the smell of wet stone and simmering stew inside. You think about not being damp. The boulder shifts slightly. You take the hint. Back into the slick path you go. As the slope rises, so does the rain. Again. As if the hill is doing it on purpose now. A divine, practical joke with infinite punchlines. And you? You're the one-man audience, laughing through gritted teeth. You glance sideways, imagining that minor weather god again, sipping nectar and muttering. He still falls for it every time. You shout toward the heavens. Tell the boulder what you think of lentils next time. A drop hits you square in the eye. You laugh, you can't help it. Because even after all this time, the gods still find new ways to be absurd. And you're still here, interpreting, even if no one's asking. You pass a tiny shrine carved into the hillside, dedicated to the patron of lost things, and recall the golden sandal incident. Plus how you once convinced a jury that socks were evil. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Just a little divot in the rock face, halfway up the outer bend of a switchback where the dust drifts sideways, and the slope pretends to be generous for 40 paces. The shrine is no taller than your knee. You found it centuries ago, mostly by tripping over it. It's never in the same spot twice. But it always shows up when you've just lost something. Today, for instance, you're fairly sure you misplaced one of your more tolerable thoughts somewhere below. A memory, or maybe a metaphor. Doesn't matter. It'll circle back. The shrine's inscription is worn smooth, but you remember what it says. You etched it yourself one afternoon out of boredom and loose quartz. To the patron of lost things, may you misplace only what's meant to be forgotten. Inside sits a tiny ceramic foot wearing a golden sandal. Or rather, it used to wear a golden sandal. Today it's barefoot. Again. You sigh? The sandal has a habit of vanishing. You've caught the shrine mid-theft before, a small shadow slipping off with the glittering footwear, always smug, always fast. You never chase. The shrine seems to enjoy the drama. The golden sandal is your oldest inside joke with the hill. A reference to the most infamous case you ever tried in Corinthian court. The people versus socks. You were younger then, full of persuasive charm, philosophical zeal, and a deep, unrelenting hatred for socks. Not sandals, not boots, just socks. You claimed they harbored toe secrecy and therefore invited moral decay. That they muffled footsteps and encouraged dishonesty. You brought forth evidence. A merchant who tripped on a discarded pair, a playwright who admitted to writer's block while wearing them, and a goat that panicked when shown wool in tubular form. The jury was unconvinced, until you pulled out the golden sandal. Shiny, dignified, open-toed. This, you declared, is the honest foot. A thunderclap followed. You still suspect Apollo was bored and dramatic that day. You won the case. Socks were banned within temple grounds for 6 years. You were celebrated as a fashion philosopher. Someone composed a hymn in your honor. It was mostly chanting "No more socks" to the rhythm of a slow drum. Historians still argue whether the anti-sock decree was political satire, performance art, or the beginning of a foot-based cult. You say, why not all three? You kneel now, carefully, and adjust the little shrine. The ceramic foot stares up at you, stoic in its barefoot melancholy. You murmur, "Don't worry, it always comes back," and it does. The sandal reappears eventually. Once, it returned covered in feathers. Another time, it showed up in the crook of a tree, filled with figs. Once, disturbingly, it reappeared already being worn by a beetle. You push the boulder past the shrine, but your mind lingers. You've lost many things over the ages. Belongings, certainly, but also ideas, phrases, identities. You once went 2 centuries answering to "that guy with the stone." You didn't mind. Accurate, if reductive. You remember misplacing a metaphor about the moon. A lovely comparison between its waning and your patience. You recited it aloud one evening and it vanished mid-sentence. You're fairly sure the wind took it, or possibly a smug poet from the underworld. There was also the time you lost your name. Not forgot, just misplaced. You wandered the hill for several cycles with only the vague sense that you were someone. The rock didn't care. It rolled just the same. When your name came back, it was hiding inside a dream about olives. You step over a patch of uneven gravel, where you once buried a thought too dangerous to keep. What if the rock is trying to help you? You stomp harder. You remember a little boy from Corinth once. Lost his bronze coin in the market and wept so bitterly you gave him your ring. He thought it was magical. You told him it granted good luck, which was a lie. But he smiled like it was the sun itself. He probably lost that ring too. It's the cycle of things. You reach a bend and glance back. The shrine is gone already, buried or vanished or simply deciding it had fulfilled its cameo. You picture the patron of lost things. A small, tired deity wearing one sandal, sipping forgotten wine, surrounded by misplaced bookmarks and socks without partners. A benevolent chaos agent. You whisper, "If you find that moon metaphor, send it back." The wind answers with the faintest echo of, "No more socks." You chuckle. And push. You spot a feather on the path. Long, silver, unmistakably mythic. And remember that time you tried to broker peace between rival harpies with a catered lunch and interpretive dance. There it is. Right in the middle of the slope. Not a bird feather. No, you know your feathers. This one is long, silver-veined, and shimmers faintly even in the ashy light of this eternal hill. It hums, very faintly, like it's remembering a high note from long ago. You stop the boulder, just for a second. It groans its usual protest, but you shush it. This is important. You reach down slowly, because the last time you picked up a magical feather too quickly, it turned into bees, and lift it from the dirt. Still warm. Of course, you'd know this shape anywhere, harpy feather. You never expected to see another one. It takes you back to that odd season, brief but wildly chaotic, when you fancied yourself a diplomat. The harpies were at war. No one remembers what started it. Some say it was a dispute over nesting cliffs. Others claim it was a disagreement about vocal scales, treble versus alto. Still others whisper it was about a stolen comb. The truth? Probably all of them. What matters is that Corinth was caught in the middle. Screaming skies, feathers in fountains, a sudden drop in bakery attendance due to airborne screech hazards. And you, ambitious and terminally unbothered by reason, decided to fix it. You organized the first and only Harpic Accord Summit, held on neutral ground, an olive grove just outside town. Shade, olives, and plausible deniability. You sent envoys bearing gifts, smoked fish wrapped in song lyrics, lavender-scented harp oil, and one extremely nervous flute player named Timon. The harpies came. All of them. Wings folded, eyes sharp, claws clicking like disapproving metronomes. You greeted them wearing your second-best tunic and a wreath you'd fashioned from apologetic vines. You began naturally with interpretive dance. Historians still debate whether your movements were meant to symbolize unity or indigestion. You claim they expressed the spiral of compromise. Most onlookers simply left. The catered lunch fared better. You'd hired local chefs to prepare a spread of roasted almonds, fermented honey cakes, and several dishes that didn't technically exist yet. You remember the brief moment of hope, when two rival harpies reached for the same fig tart and paused, wings twitching in mirror. You whispered, "Yes, yes. This is diplomacy." Then one of them sneezed, a very powerful sneeze. The table flipped, cheese hats flew, a full-scale feather flinging broke out. You were hoisted into the air mid-scuffle by one particularly strong harpy named Lyria, who screamed, "This isn't fennel!" as she flung you into a shrub. Peace talks collapsed, but there was a silver lining. The harpies agreed, mutually, begrudgingly, that you were not worth fighting over. A shared eye roll, a shrug, a fleeting truce over mutual disappointment. You considered that a win. You still have a scar from that shrub, shaped like a treble clef. Back on the hill, you twirl the feather between your fingers. It pulses faintly with magic. Maybe it's a leftover from that era. Maybe Lyria's grandniece dropped it while sightseeing. Maybe it's a divine callback. You place it gently into a notch in the boulder. It fits perfectly, like a signature. The rock doesn't seem to mind. You once tried to write a treaty between river spirits and gossipy dryads. Ended in vines covering the public bathhouse. Another diplomatic flop. But the Harpy Summit was special. Not for what it accomplished, but for what it almost did. Because for a brief moment, Corinth looked up at a sky full of chaos, and someone said, "Maybe we should ask Sisyphus." And that, you still believe, was progress. You push on. The incline here is steep, but not unkind. The feather remains tucked in its groove, riding along like a passenger. The hill watches, silent, amused. You wonder what the harpies would think now. If they'd laugh, if they'd remember the cheese hat, if Lyria still sneezes at fennel. You whisper to the wind, "Tell her I forgive the shrub." The wind doesn't answer. But a single fig leaf tumbles across your path. You smile and climb. The boulder slips suddenly and wedges itself into a crevice, forcing you into a long, slow extraction. Just like that time you got stuck inside a statue during a failed protest against municipal boredom. It happens all at once. A shift in the gravel, a sneaky lean in the stone's posture, a moment's distraction while you're admiring how the feather catches the light. And then crack. The boulder slides sideways and wedges itself with a dull, smug thunk into a crooked gap in the hillside. Not entirely stuck, but too angled to roll forward and too stubborn to reverse. You grunt, you sigh, you lean your head against its damp, stony surface and whisper, "We're doing this again, huh?" This isn't your first crevice extraction. The hill is littered with traps disguised as natural formations. Every few hundred cycles, a new one appears just deep enough to catch the edge of the boulder like a clever insult. You suspect the hill enjoys this. You lean back and inspect the situation. The boulder is jammed between two sloping outcrops, wedged like a goat in a basket, and refuses to budge despite the full application of your shoulder, hip, and signature muttered threats. You need leverage, maybe magic, maybe an ancient crowbar forged by a forgotten smith who specialized in divine inconveniences. Instead, you remember the statue incident. You were still mortal then, barely, and terribly publicly bored. Corinth had entered what one historian would later call the decade of dullness. No wars, no scandals, no misbehaving aristocrats, just trade tariffs and predictable weather. Even the poets complained. So naturally, you started a movement. Citizens for civic unpredictability. You drafted pamphlets, hosted public yawns, created a mascot, a papier-mâché turtle named Dithers. Then you escalated. You organized a protest in the town square. 30 citizens, matching robes, holding signs that said things like, "Down with stable agriculture" and "Where's the chaos?" You, of course, went one step further. You climbed into a marble statue, a heroic figure of a long-forgotten general, and declared yourself stuck in the past. It was meant to be a metaphor. You'd carved out space in the back, enough to crouch. The plan was to leap out mid-protest and deliver a thunderous speech on the tyranny of tedium. But the door jammed. The latch slipped. And there you were, curled in a marble armpit for 6 hours, yelling for your assistant while pigeons discussed your fate from the statue's head. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional performance or a metaphor that went rogue. You maintain the pigeons were judgmental. Eventually, a sculptor's apprentice freed you with a crowbar and a deeply unimpressed sigh. You gave your speech anyway. 2 listeners stayed. One fell asleep standing up. Back on the hill, you've wedged your shoulder under the boulder's lip. You try rocking it gently. Forward, back, forward. A rhythm builds. Your legs braced in the gravel, arms shaking. You mutter encouragement like it's a donkey. "Come on, you've done worse. Remember the time you rolled into that goat festival?" The boulder shifts slightly. Not enough. It's enjoying this. You imagine the gods watching, elbows on cloud rails, munching grapes, placing bets. Will he try using that feather as a lever? No, wait. He's talking to the rock again. The feather, for its part, has not moved. It glows faintly, wedged in a ridge on the boulder's surface like a reminder that even mythic moments can get stuck. You try again, this time with a half spin. A technique you invented during the cracked axle winter a few centuries back. You twist from the waist, pull with your arms, let your left heel skid just slightly, and thunk. It shifts. Not much, but enough. You grunt, reposition, and try again. Each nudge earns a shower of dust and a cloud of petty resentment from the hillside. You can almost hear the mountain muttering, "That wasn't supposed to work." One final heave. A sound like someone clearing their throat into a bag of sand. And the boulder pops free. It lurches forward 2 feet before you can stop it. You chase, scrambling, boots slipping in the churned-up grit. You catch it just before it builds momentum, your hand stinging from the friction, and your knee now slightly decorated with gravel. You pause, pant, pat the rock. You're welcome. There's a familiar peace after a crisis, the hush that follows sudden success. You look back at the crevice, smug, dark, still, and raise an eyebrow. "Next time," you mutter. "Just leave a polite note." You press on, the boulder once again heavy but obedient. The slope ahead is sharp but steady. The air is oddly sweet. Maybe someone nearby is dreaming of apricots. You think about unpredictability again. You got your wish in a way, and you haven't been bored since. You hum a song from your childhood, completely forgotten until now, and it leads to a quiet moment of wondering whether anyone still sings your name. The tune comes out of nowhere, soft and strange on your lips, like a thread you didn't know you'd been tugging. You don't even mean to hum. It just slips out, almost hidden beneath your breath, one note trailing after another like lazy sheep across a dusty plain. It's high in the beginning, then dips, almost mournful, before curling upward again, hopeful or pretending to be. The boulder doesn't seem to mind. Your feet match the rhythm before your brain catches up. Left, right, pause, push, hum. It fits, and just like that, a song you haven't thought about in centuries rolls back into your head like a forgotten guest showing up at your eternal punishment. You remember now? You were 6, maybe 7, sitting under the olive trees just outside your father's estate. Your tutor, an old man with 4 remaining teeth and a lute held together by twine and prayer, played this exact tune. He claimed it was an old sea chant, though you lived nowhere near the sea. He called it the Song of the Far Path, and sang it when lessons were done, and the cicadas were loud, and the air smelled of dust and warm bread. The words are gone, but the feeling remains. You hum louder. It echoes slightly off the hill's curve, bounces back to you like a smile. You wonder who else has heard this melody, if anyone remembers it, if it was passed down, or just got buried under layers of louder, newer songs. You picture some distant village where a grandmother sings to a grandchild in that same tune, but with different words. New words layered on top of old bones. That's how music works. It shapeshifts. It survives. Do you? You've been remembered, certainly, but how? You imagine a dusty textbook, a bored student flipping through pages. Sisyphus, king of Ephora, notorious trickster, punished eternally to push a boulder uphill in the underworld. A line, a footnote, maybe a meme now. Something clever and sad. Do they sing your name? Not in reverence, surely. Maybe in jest or metaphor. Don't be a Sisyphus, someone says, while doing dishes that never end. This task is pure Sisyphus. You've become an adjective, a warning, a shrug. Historians still debate whether you truly deserved this. Some say you were just clever. Others insist you mocked the gods too many times. Some argue you were framed. Your story exaggerated by rivals who couldn't outwit you politically. You suspect it's all true, and none of it. Memory's strange that way. The boulder rumbles faintly beneath your hands. You hum softer now, the melody moving ahead of you like a guiding thread. You picture the song wrapping around the stone, sinking into its cracks, becoming part of the rhythm of its rolling. You once asked a wandering philosopher, during one of the few breaks you were allowed, if music could imprint itself on objects. He said, "Of course. That's how liars remember how to sing." You liked that answer. You wonder now if the hill remembers your tune, if it's hiding verses in the dust, if somewhere deep in the stone, your song has carved itself into the marrow of the mountain. You push. The rhythm feels easier somehow, as if the boulder is listening, not helping, never helping, but swaying slightly to your beat. You reach a plateau, not a summit, just a brief, flat breath between climbs. The air is warmer here. Still, your feet ache less. The song still hums in your chest, not from memory now, but from muscle. It's part of you again. You try a word, just one. Thalassa. See, you don't know if it belongs to the song. It probably doesn't. But you keep it anyway. You remember standing on a boat once, briefly, and not entirely legally, watching the horizon stretch out like a dare. The wind had a tune that day, too. You haven't seen the sea and, well, you've lost count. But this tune? It makes you feel as if the tide might still be out there, humming it back. You glance up at the path. The incline starts again just beyond a crescent-shaped stone. It always does. You hum one last note, soft and low, and the hill seems to hold its breath. The boulder creaks forward, its weight anchoring you once again. But now there's a melody beneath the silence, a thread of memory tied to a time before punishment, before politics, before being known only as the man with the rock. You whisper to the wind, "If someone still sings my name, tell them I remember." And you push on. A faint earthquake trembles beneath your feet, triggering memories of when you tried to outlaw tectonic activity for interrupting public speeches. At first, it's subtle. Just a ripple beneath the soles of your feet, a twitch in the gravel, the kind of movement that makes you pause and glance over your shoulder. Not out of fear, just irritation. You know this rhythm. You plant your feet and wait. The tremor grows bolder, vibrating up through your calves and into your hips like a drunk musician warming up a lyre. You mutter, "Not this again." The boulder seems to sense it, too, leaning slightly to the left, humming a low vibration that matches the tremor. You plant your palms against it, steady it, and brace for whatever minor geological tantrum the underworld has planned for today. And naturally, your mind drifts to earthquakes past. Specifically, the time you tried to make them illegal. It was early in your reign, back when you still believed civic order could be enforced by strong verbs and well-shaped legislation. You were hosting a speech in the central plaza of Corinth, announcing a new series of public benches. The speech was to be stirring, poetic, even visionary. You had practiced. You'd written metaphors about the dignity of seated thought. You'd choreographed a small fanfare involving goats. And then, just as you reached your impassioned line, "Let no citizen be left to stand in thoughtless fatigue," the ground wobbled. Not a major quake. Just enough to make the benches creak, the goats bleat, and you drop your script into a puddle. You finished the speech from memory, of course. But it didn't feel grand anymore. Your audience applauded politely, mostly out of sympathy. That night, fueled by embarrassment and spiced wine, you drafted Ordinance Elsetaint, a formal prohibition on all tectonic mischief. It passed unanimously, mostly because no one took it seriously. The scribes even added footnotes in verse. You commissioned small signs. "This ground is certified stable. Violators will be shaken." Historians still argue whether this was proto-scientific hubris or pure Sisyphean comedy. You prefer the term preemptive arrogance. Naturally, the earth didn't care. The tremors continued. Not often. Just enough to be petty. One even timed itself perfectly to interrupt your recitation of a newly penned epic titled Ode to Urban Drainage. That one really stung. You once attempted negotiations with a priest who claimed to speak on behalf of underground spirits. He said, "The spirits like to stretch." You suggested calisthenics instead of tectonics. The meeting ended when a sinkhole swallowed his chair. Now, on this hill, you feel every tremble. The earth here doesn't just shake, it sighs, rolls its weight, reminds you gently and constantly that you live on borrowed stability. The quake subsides, just a flicker now, fading back into the deep. But it's left its mark, a slight skew in the gravel, a ridge where there wasn't one before. The boulder resettles itself, pleased with the new angle. You roll your eyes and adjust your grip. You remember writing a poem once about fault lines, called them the jealous seams of Gaia. It was received poorly. One critic called it geologically offensive. You took that as a compliment. The funniest thing, really, is how no one remembers your more serious legislation. Your irrigation reforms, your civic calendar reorganization, your brief but earnest campaign for standardized bread loaf sizes. No, they remember the earthquake ban, and the goat who ran through your fountain during the vote. You reach a stretch of hill that's unusually smooth, almost polished. A sign, perhaps, that tremors have worn away the sharper edges, or that even punishment requires moments of mercy. You push the boulder gently, feeling it glide with an ease you don't trust. You hum again, that same tune from earlier. It seems to settle the air. You speak aloud, just to hear your own voice. I hereby decree that all quakes henceforth require written notice and a 5-minute delay to allow the speaker to finish. The hill rumbles, just once, gently. You smile. I'll take that as approval, and push forward, because even if the ground doesn't listen, you've never been one to stay quiet. A goat appears, calm, unbothered, chewing a scroll, and you remember your brief stint as a philosophy teacher that ended in bleating chaos and a ruined amphitheater. You see it before you hear it. A small shape ahead, standing proudly in the middle of the path like it owns the whole hill. And to be fair, it might. It's a goat. Of course it's a goat. Pale cream-colored fur, curved horns, eyes with that unsettling rectangular serenity. And in its mouth, a scroll, half unrolled, slightly damp, being chewed with exactly the kind of deliberate disinterest that goats have perfected over millennia. You sigh. Not again. The goat meets your gaze. It does not move. The scroll rustles softly as it vanishes inch by inch into its determined mouth. You take a moment to process this, then burst into laughter. Because how could you not? Of course there's a goat. Of course it's eating knowledge. This hill has a sense of humor, and today it's chewing on your past. Specifically, your time as a teacher of philosophy. It started simply enough. After one too many courtroom fiascos, you decided to take a break from law and politics. Something quieter, nobler, less likely to involve flaming chariots or angry temple custodians. Teaching. You founded a small school on the edge of Corinth, under an olive grove. Called it the Gentle Inquiry Society. You wore long robes and practiced contemplative pacing. You quoted yourself a lot. The students were variable. Some earnest, some bored. One just came for the olives. But you had hope. You built a curriculum. Logic, rhetoric, creative insults, and a course called Thinking About Thinking While Reclining. Then came the goat. It started as a mascot. A symbolic animal, you said. Resilient, independent, inherently philosophical. The students named it Perseverance. You taught it to bow on command. But Perseverance had ambitions. One afternoon, you were delivering a lecture titled On the Nature of Objective Truth in an Irrational Universe. Mid-sentence, you heard a crunch. Not a twig, not a fig. A scroll. In Perseverance's mouth, you shouted. Students laughed. The goat sprinted. You gave chase, mid-lecture robe billowing behind you. It felt very dramatic until you tripped on your own sandal and crashed into a crate of amphorae. The scroll, your prized copy of the 9 Circles of Civic Doubt, was never recovered. After that, the goat returned often, uninvited, always during your most complex discussions. It had a particular taste for the work of Heraclitus. You think it liked the paradoxes. You tried deterrence, fences, bells, even philosophical decoys. Nothing worked. The final straw was the amphitheater incident. You had been invited to give a public talk. Is the soul a sieve? You wore a special tunic embroidered with metaphors. The crowd was decent. There was even wine. Midway through your third analogy, perseverance arrived. Calm, majestic, dragging behind it a long string of scrolls tied together into a crude philosophical train. Then it urinated on the podium. You were never asked to speak there again. Historians still debate whether the goat was an allegory, a divine prank, or just a goat. You suspect all 3. Corinthian street artists drew murals of the bleating scholar. You were not amused. Except that one with the monocle. That one was oddly flattering. Back on the hill, this goat finishes the last of its scroll. It licks its lips, audibly. You approach slowly, careful not to startle it. It watches you, expression blank and mildly superior. It doesn't move. You sit. Why not? The boulder rests nearby, content for once. The air is still. The goat takes a step forward and gently butts your knee, as if to say, "You're still thinking too hard." You chuckle. "Am I?" The goat blinks. You lean back on your elbows, staring at the pale sky. You wonder if the scroll had been yours, a draft of something forgotten, a half-formed thought left behind in one of your many failed treatises. The idea that maybe knowledge isn't hoarded, but chewed, processed slowly, then fertilized. The goat trots off down the hill, probably to start a school of its own. You rise, dust yourself off, and return to the boulder. It's heavier now. Or maybe you are. But your hands find their usual places, and the climb resumes. As you push, you mutter aloud, "Perseverance is a goat," and somehow that feels profound. A shadow crosses overhead, a winged shape too large to name. And you recall the forgotten legend you once told about a bird that remembers every lie ever spoken. It comes in slow like dusk, not light exactly, but the absence of it. Softened edges, a chill down your spine, the way even your thoughts lean slightly sideways. You pause. The boulder hums beneath your palms, uneasy. Then you look up. The shape is enormous, silent. Not close enough to see feathers or eyes, but close enough to blot out part of the sky. A winged form, slow and sure, gliding without effort, as if time itself is beneath its talons. You don't move. You've seen many things on this hill. You've seen skies with teeth, clouds that whisper in forgotten dialects, and once, you swear, a parade of floating pomegranates. But this is different. The air tightens. You murmur, "Still flying after all this time?" Because you know that silhouette, or rather, you remember it. The legend was never written down. You told it once, in the back of a wine shop, during a storm that soaked the streets and turned sandals into soup. You were deep into your second cup, and lecturing no one in particular when it came to you. The bird that remembers every lie. Not a punishment, you'd said. Not a spy, just a witness. An enormous bird, some said eagle, others raven. One dramatist claimed it was a feathered sphinx with opinions, who circled the world gathering falsehoods. Every time someone lied, a feather darkened. Every time a truth was twisted, a new wrinkle curled under its eye. When it had gathered enough, you mused, it would land once, just once, and sing all the lies at once. The sound would echo through the stones and water, cracking illusions like glass. Someone asked, "What does it eat?" You replied, "Regret." Someone else asked, "How do you know this?" And you, very poetically, said, "Because it once landed on my roof." You were quite proud of that answer. No one wrote it down. No one needed to. It lived as a rumor, a tavern story, a whisper among traveling actors and bored guards. You heard it years later, twice removed, badly told, with extra wings and a dramatic subplot about enchanted dice. You didn't correct them, and now it's here. The shadow glides, smooth and unhurried. It doesn't flap, just leans on invisible currents. You try to track its eyes, but the sun above is too pale to offer contrast. You can't even be sure it sees you, but you know it remembers you. You've told many lies, most small, a few clever, a handful dangerously beautiful. Once, you lied to a crowd that justice was simple. They cheered. Another time, you lied to a child that their missing dog would return. They cried, then smiled. And then, of course, the lie you told to Hades himself. That you hadn't planned your escape. That one still stings, mostly because it almost worked. Historians still argue whether your greatest gift was deceit or hope. They often confuse the two. You're not sure they're wrong. The shadow passes over you fully now, and the temperature drops. You don't shiver. There's something strangely comforting in the cool. You whisper, "I still remember the first lie I ever told. You were 3. Claimed you hadn't eaten the dates. You had." Your father laughed. Your mother didn't. The boulder creaks under your grip, oddly silent, like it too is listening. You wonder, if the bird ever does sing, will you recognize your own voice in the chorus? The shadow begins to fade, wingtips dissolving into the horizon. A few pebbles fall nearby. The hill is quiet again, but something lingers, not fear, not even awe. Just a pause in the rhythm of eternity. A breath held slightly longer than needed. You place your hands on the rock again, firmer this time. "That wasn't for you," you whisper. "That was for the sky." And push. The stone rolls forward, obedient, as if the lies it carries have settled more evenly now. The song from earlier returns to your lips, but now a single new note slips in. Lower, darker, truth-shaped. You don't sing it yet. Some truths must steep. You reach a rare patch of moss, soft, green, almost alive, and it reminds you of that brief, glorious era when you tried to legalize naps as a civic duty. It squishes under your sandals with a sound so gentle, so utterly unhill-like, that for a moment you wonder if you've accidentally wandered off the path and into someone's underworld garden. Moss, real moss. Green, velvety, growing in the cracks between rocks like a secret rebellion against the endless dryness. You stop walking. You kneel slowly. Your knees creak, your thighs complain, and run your hand across it. It's cold and damp and smells like quiet places. Riverbanks, shaded temples, the underside of a forgotten fountain. And just like that, you remember the napping mandate. You were still king then. Barely. The court was restless. The people were bored. Not bored in the philosophical sense, like when you contemplate eternity and the futility of mortal striving. No, annoyed, bored, grumpy, twitchy, throwing figs at statues, kind of bored. You'd read a scroll about a mountain town where productivity had soared after the introduction of afternoon stillness periods. You interpreted this very loosely and decided to apply it rigorously. You called it the Great Civic Repose Act. Every citizen was required to nap. Daily. Just after the mid-meal. Enforcement was gentle but enthusiastic. Soft bells chimed across the city. Official nap marshals were hired. Pillows were distributed at public offices. You even had a fleet of attendants trained in the art of soothing lullabies and very slow flute solos. And for a while, it worked. Merchants returned to their stalls refreshed. Debates in the Senate became less shouty. Even the goats mellowed out. There were fewer cart accidents. Public mood improved. One poet declared your rule a kingdom of yawned justice. Of course, there were critics. Some philosophers insisted mandatory naps were a violation of conscious liberty. One merchant claimed his dreams became too vivid, and naturally some citizens just faked napping and secretly worked instead, greedy for an edge. You personally wrote a response to the Senate's inquiry. Sleep is the only tax equally paid by kings and beggars. Why not mandate equity where we can? They hated it. The law was repealed within 3 months. The pillows were repurposed for theatrical slapstick. The marshals became bakers. You mourned the end quietly, with one last ceremonial nap on the steps of the courthouse. Historians still argue whether it was proto-socialism or just a very elaborate excuse for you to sleep more. You say, yes, back on the hill you lie down, just for a minute. The moss accepts you without comment. Your back thanks you. Your shoulders loosen. Even the boulder seems content to wait, just teetering behind you like a grumpy dog finally finding shade. You close your eyes, and for a flickering instant you dream. Not a full dream. This place rarely allows that. More a half memory, half invention. You're in the olive grove again. A child again. Your mother is singing. Or is it someone else? You can't quite tell. The sky is gold. The air smells like bread. You smile. The moss shifts slightly beneath you, breathing almost. When you open your eyes, the sky has not changed, but something in you has. A softness, a temporary rebellion against the grind of eternity. You sit up slowly, pat the moss. Don't go anywhere, you whisper. You're the best thing this hill has ever grown. The boulder waits. You return to it, rested if not restored. You consider reinstating the nap mandate. You're not king anymore, but maybe there's still authority and persistence. You smile and push. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of figs and ink, and you recall the time you forged a peace treaty between 2 rival libraries by inventing a third one no one could visit. The breeze arrives like a friend with secrets, warm, dry, full of whispers. But this one brings sense, too. The sweetness of ripe figs, just split. The sharp tang of fresh ink on drying papyrus. A trace of candle smoke. Your stomach tightens with memory, though you haven't eaten in, well, since punishment began. Eternity rarely offers snack breaks. The scent of ink hits harder than expected. And with it, you remember, the Treaty of 3 Libraries. You should never have gotten involved. You weren't a librarian. You weren't even an especially good reader by then, though you looked the part in your long robe and habitual squint. It started when the 2 biggest libraries in Corinth began an all-out war. Not a bloody war, a footnote war. Librarians whispering criticisms into scroll margins, accusations of forgery in the dedications. Entire volumes misfiled out of spite. Someone created a decoy scroll containing nothing but drawings of angry bees. Things escalated. It reached the point where entering either library meant choosing a side. Even students were forced to wear colored sashes, red for the Western Archive, blue for the Eastern Repository. Scroll theft skyrocketed. So did papyrus-based pranks. One librarian's tunic was found replaced with index tabs, and you, bored and meddlesome, decided to fix it. You couldn't take sides. You couldn't shame them. So you did the next best thing. You lied. You announced the founding of a new library. You called it the Middle Archive. Claimed it would be the most neutral, complete, harmonious library in all of Greece, housed somewhere between the West and the East, which conveniently described several places you refused to specify. You began circulating references to the Middle Archive, footnotes citing works that didn't exist, catalog entries that named volumes only found in the restricted Northern Annex. No one had ever seen it, but everyone wanted access. Rival librarians panicked. They softened toward each other, sharing scrolls to prove they didn't need the middle archive. Joint lectures emerged. A collaborative volume was written called The Myth of the Third Shelf. A few people even traveled through Corinth's alleyways late at night, looking for a hidden door. Some say they found it, but you invented the door, too. Historians still argue whether the Middle Archive ever existed. A fragment bearing its seal was once found in a wine cask, but you planted that. Probably. You don't quite remember anymore. What you do remember is how, for one golden year, the two libraries worked in peace, united by the fear that someone, somewhere, was out-archiving them. Eventually, the lie wore thin. Someone asked to tour the annex. You claimed it had temporarily relocated due to scroll mites. Interest faded. The libraries resumed bickering, though more politely. But for that 1 year, it was quiet. Pages turned softly. Ink dried undisturbed. On the hill, the wind brings the smell of parchment again. Your fingers itch with the memory of dipping a quill into ink thick as midnight. You used to sign your letters with a flourish shaped like a wave. No one ever asked why. You pass a crooked rock that reminds you of a lectern. You resist the urge to stand atop it and deliver a stirring speech on the importance of imaginary institutions. The boulder rolls easier here, as if the lie you once told still echoes gently through the stones. You wonder if the gods remember that story, if they ever laughed. Or maybe they're building the Middle Archive now, just to spite you. You smile and push forward. The sky changes color, impossibly slowly, and it brings back the day you tried to outlaw dusk because it made people too reflective. It starts with a shift so gradual, you almost miss it. The sky, long a flat and forgettable shade, somewhere between tired marble and wet parchment, deepens. Not darkens exactly, just adjusts. A blush of violet on the edge of the horizon, a trickle of bronze curling through the clouds. Light somehow begins to feel personal. And your first thought is, oh no, not this again. Because you remember this time of day. You hate this time of day. Not for its beauty. You admire that in a passive, vaguely resentful sort of way. You hate dusk because of what it does to people. Back when you were king, dusk was trouble. Workers paused at their tasks and stared wistfully at chimneys. Philosophers grew unbearable, quoting themselves, leaning on balconies, mistaking humidity for inspiration. Even the goats slowed down, standing in profile like they were auditioning for tragic poetry. And worse than the goats were the citizens. They got moody. Suddenly everyone wanted to write letters, ask hard questions, reevaluate relationships. One man tried to propose marriage to his shadow, and so naturally you tried to fix it. Edict of Reflective Suppression, Article 4. Dusk is henceforth cancelled. You worded it better than that, of course. The phrasing was poetic. That no hour shall be cast in half-light, wherein the mind grows soft, and the heart confuses air with ache. You even designed a campaign, mirrors to be hung facing east to reflect the fading light away. Trumpeters were instructed to play cheerful tunes at twilight, mostly about taxes and drainage. Figs were handed out to distract the sentimental. For 1 week, it sort of worked. Sunsets were drowned out by brass. Poets grumbled. One child was fined for writing, "The sky is sad now," in chalk. The public square became aggressively well lit. But humans, being humans, simply found new ways to feel wistful. They started waking up earlier, staring at morning dew with longing. One woman claimed to hear sonnets in rooster crows. You conceded defeat. Historians still argue whether the dusk ban was sincere or satirical. Some say it was your attempt to wrestle with your own melancholy. Others claim it was part of a larger plan to ban all poetic metaphors for the moon. Back on the hill, the light curls around you like an old song you'd almost forgotten. It pools softly in the dips between stones. The boulder gleams faintly, golden and heavy. Even it seems to exhale. You sigh, because you know what this does. It opens doors in your memory you were doing a fine job ignoring. It makes you think of people you loved but cannot name anymore, of conversations half finished, of the first time you realized your life was going to be a long, slow performance of persistence. You remember a girl, maybe, red hair, laughter like gravel in a flute. You were going to tell her something important. You never did. You remember sitting by a river, counting ripples and pretending you could control their patterns with your thoughts. You remember not yet being a myth. The air cools. Your muscles ache. You rest for a moment, leaning against the boulder, letting it bear your weight. You whisper, "All right, Dusk, do your worst." But instead of pain, it offers softness, not sadness, just space. Space to feel tired. Space to remember. Space to wish that just once, someone else might take your place for a single climb so you could watch the sky change all the way through, uninterrupted. You shake your head. The boulder shifts slightly, like it's nudging you back to work. Yeah, you mutter and resume. The sky continues its transformation behind you. You do not look back, because you know better now. Dusk wins every time. A small doorway appears in the rock, just for a moment, and you remember the time you tried to escape the underworld by disguising yourself as your own statue. It's near the crest of the path, one of those deceptive little curves that makes you think the climb might end this time. It doesn't, but something new catches your eye. Just off the main path, tucked into the base of a sharp boulder ridge, there's a door. A real one, sort of. Low, narrow, barely taller than your waist. Made of stone, or maybe shadow pretending to be stone. It doesn't glow or hum or do anything theatrical. It's just there. You blink. It's gone. You blink again. Still gone. But you saw it. You know you did. And instantly, your body remembers the sensation of marble on skin. The chill of wet plaster. The itch of standing still far too long while sweat runs down your ribs. Ah yes, the statue incident. You had been dead a while by then. Technically. But details get fuzzy in the underworld. Definitions of alive, dead, remembered, punished, they blur. You'd discovered, through careful observation, that souls of artistic value were sometimes granted more leniency. Poets could wander a little. Sculptors could request fresh clay. Tragedians received small amphitheaters where they could bore one another to pieces. You thought, why not me? You had your likeness commissioned. Secretly. You even found a half-blind sculptor willing to believe your tale of being a lesser-known river god with poor posture. He shaped your form in soft limestone, then carved beneath your foot. Anonymous civic philosopher, patron of strategic inconvenience. You positioned the statue near the border of the asphodel fields, where forms tended to blend, records got hazy, and guards grew lax. You stood beside it, mimicking its pose, hoping to confuse any observer. The plan? Simple. Pose as the statue. Wait for a moment of bureaucratic confusion. Walk into freedom like a misplaced vase. You lasted nearly 4 hours. The third hour was the hardest. Your arm cramped. A fly crawled into your ear. A passing shade bowed deeply and whispered, "Thank you for your wisdom," which nearly made you snort. It all unraveled when a curious poet decided to declaim an original ode to your noble stillness. It was 5 stanzas. You sneezed during the 6th line, dragged back. No actual punishment, just chuckling. From the guards, from the other souls, even from the statue, which, days later, someone claimed winked. Historians still argue whether this was your cleverest escape attempt or your most embarrassing. One underworld playwright even wrote a farce about it, titled Sisyphus in Still Life. You did not approve. You did, however, appreciate the casting. Back on the hill, you pause where the door had been. It's just rock now, harmless, solid, but you run your fingers over the spot. The texture is slightly different. Smoother, warmer, almost like it remembers you too. You whisper, "Next time I'll try being a tapestry." The boulder, to its credit, doesn't laugh. But it does shift slightly, urging you upward. You sigh. No doors, no tricks, no loopholes left. But the climb isn't quite the same now. The memory softens the edge of repetition. The door, real or not, has left a smudge on the stone that feels almost like a wink. You look back once. Just once. The sky behind you holds the last threads of whatever color dusk had painted, fading now into something cooler, quieter, less dramatic. You keep pushing, because it's what you do. And, though you'd never admit it aloud, some small, ridiculous part of you still believes. Maybe next time, the door stays open just long enough. Maybe. And now, your journey pauses. The hill grows still, its weight loosening its grip on your ankles. The wind softens to a hush. Even the dust seems to drift slower now, curling in lazy spirals before settling gently across the slope. You sit. The boulder rests nearby, quiet for once. Not rolling, not resisting, just existing beside you like a strange old friend with nothing left to say. Above, the sky has forgotten its colors. It's just soft now, pale and quiet. The kind of sky you don't need to interpret. The kind that lets your thoughts float without anchoring. You lean back, bones clicking gently into place, and let your eyes close. Not to sleep, exactly, but to be. To ease into that hush that comes when you're no longer trying to remember or impress or win. In the far-off distance, a goat bleats once, then falls silent. The air smells faintly of moss and warm stone, and maybe, just maybe, a scroll half-chewed by moonlight. You've done enough climbing for now. There's nothing to prove tonight. No summits to reach, no clever tricks to play. Just this moment, suspended in the breath between effort and surrender. So breathe. Let the stillness wrap around you like old linen, soft, familiar, forgiving. Let your body forget its shape. Let your mind uncurl. Let your heart rest from remembering. You are here, and that is enough. Sleep now if you can, or simply listen to the silence settling over the stones. It doesn't judge you. It never has. Good night.